It was one of those Sunday mornings when I simply desired to visit Home Depot and pass the time. I was aware that I should have been attending church, but this alternative seemed much more enjoyable. I didn't really have any specific needs, but since I had a strong dislike for golf, this seemed like the best way to spend my time. Hopefully, by the end of the year, there would be a sale on grass and seed. 2 years ago, I managed to purchase 4 bags at a quarter of their regular price. John, it's a pleasure to see you here. Barry Bartell was a friend of the family, not extremely close, but close enough to have a cup of coffee and a chat with, even though I hadn't seen him in nearly a year. Coincidentally, Barry's wife, Greta, and my wife, Sheila, were departing tomorrow morning for a week-long Caribbean cruise. Since Barry couldn't take time off work to join them, Sheila decided that I should stay home with the children so that she and Greta could enjoy their seaside vacation together. She insisted that I would be the third wheel. Additionally, the 2 ladies could save money by sharing the cabin. I wasn't thrilled about it, but I didn't want to argue. I'm sure you can all see where this is heading. After exchanging quick greetings, we began to wander around the pest control department. John, I'm sorry to hear that you couldn't take time off work for the cruise. I was really looking forward to it. What the heck? He was the one who couldn't get time off. What was he anticipating? Oh, Barry, I've already taken a week off. I'll use the time to paint the kitchen while the ladies are away. Sheila informed me that you couldn't take time off work. I work for my father, John. I can leave whenever I want. I was getting ready when Greta told me you couldn't make it. Barry and I stood there, silently looking at each other. The silence was interrupted by an elderly individual driving one of those motorized carts. Are you 2 going to stand here all day? I pushed my cart aside and glanced at Barry. Would you like to go grab some coffee? Certainly. We spent the next 2 hours at McDonald's. It wasn't difficult for us to deduce that our wives had conspired to go on a 7-day Caribbean cruise without us. The primary question was, what was their motive? We both avoided addressing the obvious until we reached our breaking point. It was akin to the well-known metaphorical elephant in the room. Eventually, I took the initiative. So, Barry, are they bringing along 2 men, or are they intending to meet a couple of strangers? He hesitated to respond. I suppose he didn't even want to entertain the possibility of potential answers. John, would you like a Danish pastry? He wasn't intentionally evading the question, but I sensed that he was attempting to postpone it. I nodded in agreement and also picked up my empty coffee cup. 5 minutes later, we had 2 freshly baked buns and 2 steaming cups of coffee. John, I can't fathom Greta engaging with a stranger, so we'll have to arrange some sort of pre-planned encounter. I hate to admit it, but I concur. I fail to comprehend why they would embark on a trip to engage in such activities. Wouldn't it be simpler to find someone nearby? Perhaps it would. I'll be frank with you. I don't keep tabs on Greta's actions or whereabouts. I have always trusted her and never considered the possibility that she might be involved with someone else. Why would 2 mothers with school-aged children even contemplate such actions? We both attempted to take a sip of our coffee, but it was scorching hot, forcing us to abandon the attempt. We set our cups aside and gazed out the window. John, it's likely a couple of men from their workplace. Sheila and Greta were employed at International Casualty Insurance. Barry's statement seemed logical. Is there anything we can do to prevent this? Barry, if they are comfortable enough with these men to go on a cruise with them, we are probably already too late. What do you mean? Do you think they have already been unfaithful? I hate to say it, but I'm beginning to think so. Barry stood up and walked over to the service counter. A minute later, he returned. Damn it, they charged 27 cents for a glass of ice. Why did we even come here? We each added some ice to our scalding coffee for a few moments. Neither of us uttered a word. John, now that I think about it, Greta has been working extra hours a lot lately, both in the evenings and on weekends. I hadn't really considered it before. I must admit, I'm starting to see your point. I won't prevent Sheila from going, But I won't just sit idly either. I finished my Danish pastry and disposed of the remaining coffee in the trash bin. Barry, let's meet here tomorrow, right after the girls depart for the airport. We have some planning to do. Be careful not to say anything to Greta that might indicate you're aware of what's happening. Barry gave me a thumbs up as I exited the door. It seemed like he intended to stay and finish his coffee. He didn't appear pleased when I arrived home. Everything seemed quite normal. Our two sons, Todd, who is 9 years old, and Jason, who is 10, were engrossed in front of the television. I felt they should be outside, but I had long given up on that idea. Sheila was behaving just as she always did. I sat and perused the newspaper while she prepared a late lunch. I expected her to discuss her trip, but she seemed to avoid any conversation on the matter. Naturally, that in itself was intriguing. After lunch, I finally took the boys outside to play some soccer. Meanwhile, Sheila was busy packing her belongings inside. She insisted on having everything ready so she could leave without any issues in the morning. I smiled, stealing a few glances towards the house. How could I have overlooked this? How foolish had I been? Why hadn't I suspected this long ago? Todd, Jason, I'll be occupied painting the house next week while your mother is away. What do you think about spending that week with Grandma and Grandpa Connor? I didn't wait for an answer. They both hurried straight to the house, and within 10 minutes, they were packing up. My parents had a farm 20 miles outside of town, and they had horses. It wasn't too difficult. Sheila grumbled a bit, but didn't seem determined to make a fuss about it. By the time I returned home, my wife had already prepared dinner after freshening up. Sheila went to take a shower. Naturally, this gave me the opportunity to quickly check her bags. My suspicions were confirmed when I noticed 3 things. Firstly, most of her sleeping gear seemed unusual, especially if she was spending time with Greta. The second red flag was the discovery of a new orange bikini carefully hidden in her makeup bag. However, the most alarming find was the 210 packs of condoms concealed in a case. I couldn't help but question why my wife would take condoms on a cruise. I scolded myself for even entertaining such a thought. Sheila had mentioned wanting a good night's sleep before the trip, while I had decided to indulge in a marathon of Steven Seagal movies. Unfortunately, I didn't have international coverage on my cell phone. Unlike Sheila, who had a work phone with international coverage. Although I couldn't call her, she assured me that she would contact home daily, or if any issues arose. I reassured her not to worry, explaining that if I didn't answer, I could be at my parents' house with the boys or occupied with painting. My response seemed to bring her relief. As I dropped Sheila off, Greta was already waiting at the terminal, smiling and waving at me as Sheila joined her. I eagerly anticipated seeing Barry. Once I parked, Barry approached us with a couple of cups of coffee and complained about the ice. "John, please tell me you have some good news," Barry pleaded. Regrettably, I could only shake my head in the negative. Greta had packed 2 new dresses and lingerie that most women would find embarrassing. To make matters worse, I discovered a new bikini and a significant number of condoms. It hadn't even crossed my mind to search her makeup bag. I couldn't decide whether to be relieved that I hadn't found anything or regretful for not searching more thoroughly. Barry and I spent the next 20 minutes lamenting over our predicament. Once we finished our coffee, it was time to focus on work. Our first destination was International Casualty Insurance, where we informed the receptionist that we needed to interview Kermit Templeton, the head of human resources. Barry and I had known Kermit since high school. We weren't exactly close friends, but we did get along. Oh no, Kermit didn't seem pleased to see us. "Could you please close the door?" Barry and I settled into uncomfortable chairs. "Do you know why we're here, Kermit?" "I have a pretty good idea." Barry and I exchanged smiles, but Kermit remained serious. "We were hoping you could provide us with a number of employees who have been on vacation this week." "Is that a question?" Our smiles faded into frowns. Kermit's demeanor quickly shifted. After typing on his computer, he sighed and mentioned Sheila and Greta. 14 employees are on vacation. Can you print out a list for us?" No, but I can give you the information you need. Kermit typed a few more commands, and the printer beside him whirred to life. Handing us 2 sheets of paper, he awaited our reaction. The pages contained details about Clayton Mankiw and Calvin Bostic. Barry and I quickly scanned through the documents, and then turned to Kermit. These 2 individuals are on the same cruise as Greta and Sheila. There's no need to see the rest of the list. That was your inquiry. Out of curiosity, do you know the pairings? Placing a photo of Calvin in front of Barry and another in front of me, Kermit seemed hesitant to respond. Does anyone else know about this? Kermit struggled to answer, but eventually relented. Everyone is aware. I thought the company had a policy against such situations. Yes, but it only applies if there's a complaint. And then what? Usually just a warning. And if we push for more? You're not planning to complicate things for me, are you? Barry and I shared a glance. No words were spoken, but it was clear we were in agreement. Kermit, if those 4 individuals are still employed here next week, we will take legal action. We don't have all the details yet, but it's inevitable. We will arrange for our attorney to reach out to you or your legal department, depending on your preference. Any inquiries? I apologize for this situation. We did not take any action as the relationship was consensual. No one was coerced or forced into anything. Although we are uncertain about the extent of the relationship, we acknowledge its existence. We refrained from taking any action since no one had lodged a complaint until now. Yes, Kermit, it is official. You terminate all 4 of us, and we will not retaliate. If no action is taken, you should anticipate a lawsuit, and it will be a highly publicized one. Barry and I made a stand before we departed. We shook hands with Kermit as we exited through the main entrance. Barry glanced at me. So what do we do now? I believe we should meet with the lawyer first. Then we can have lunch and proceed to the local travel agency. As we parked the cars and headed towards the lawyer's office, Barry suddenly halted. I looked at him and shrugged. What's the matter? John, what exactly are we going to ask the lawyer to do for us? What do you mean? Well, I think once we step through that door, it will come at a significant cost, and all we'll end up with is a lighter wallet. We will be divorced. We will be free from those unfaithful women. Ponder on it. We will be obligated to pay both of them alimony. We will be compelled to continue making mortgage payments. We will be forced to relinquish custody of the children and subsequently pay child support. All the unpaid bills will be piled onto us, and the court will likely mandate that we provide our wives with credit cards and cell phones. By the time it concludes, we will also have to finance our children's college education. And what do we gain from it? Nothing, as far as I can discern. Why on earth would any rational person choose to get a divorce? The only reason I can think of is to maintain contact with his children. That's the entire trade-off. Damn it, Barry. I love my kids. I don't want to lose them. I understand exactly how you feel. I would be devastated if I couldn't see my daughters again. However, I don't want to suffer financial ruin simply because my wife was unfaithful. After the events that transpired, the most just course of action would be to entrust the children to our care and hold them accountable. However, it seems highly unlikely that such a resolution will ever come to fruition, does it not? I can't help but feel as though I am being coerced. Both of us stood in silence amidst the parking lot. John, who on earth is responsible for creating these unjust laws? It is incredibly unfair. We turned and made our way back to our respective cars. Barry, I must admit that Sheila is an exceptional mother. If I were to have children, I doubt I would be able to match her level of competence. Yes, I understand. The same can be said for Greta. She is a devoted mother, and the girls adore her. It pains me to say it, but she would make a better parent than I ever could, despite her infidelity. We both remained silent, leaning against the hood of my car. I absent-mindedly kicked at the fine gravel beneath my feet, while Barry fiddled with the zipper on his jacket. John, Would you like to go grab some ribs? We shared a full portion and indulged in 3 beers each. To pass the time, we switched to coffee and savored servings of banana pudding. Once we had sobered up enough to drive, we made our way to the reputable Good Times travel agency. Nancy Rayburn, an old family friend who had now become a former family friend, was the proprietor. Everyone within our circle of friends and family relied on Nancy's expertise to plan and organize their trips. Loyalty was the sole reason she managed to stay afloat in recent years, as the internet had virtually wiped out her competition. As we entered the premises, it was evident from the expression on her face. She didn't need to vocalize it. Barry and I took our seats, wearing smiles as we observed the instrument of our downfall. The other 2 agents seated beside Nancy promptly excused themselves for lunch. One of them had a brown bag resting on his desk. It was clear that everyone in the office was aware of the situation and attempting to distance themselves. We waited in silence, refraining from uttering a word. Nancy smiled, attempting to find comfort in her chair to no avail. Eventually, she could no longer contain herself. "How may I assist you gentlemen today?" Barry and I exchanged glances and let out a loud giggle, audible enough for Nancy to hear. I leaned in closer and spoke in a hushed tone. "You have a mere 5 minutes to divulge everything, or we will create such a commotion that the authorities will have no choice but to treat your office as a crime scene. Come on, gentlemen, cut me some slack. I won't disclose anything more than what your wives have already shared with you. You wouldn't do anything foolish, would you?" Barry stood up and turned towards the entrance of the office. 2 other agents and a couple planning a trip were present. "Listen up, everyone. I suggest you vacate the premises for a few minutes, as we will be rearranging the furniture." "John, Barry, hold on. Hold on. All right, all right. What on earth do you want? Just don't get me or the office into trouble. I don't need any unwanted attention." Good Times Travel Agency was a franchise. Nancy has faced some issues over the past year. She doesn't want any more information to come to light. Barry gestured for everyone to relax and settle back into their seats. "Nancy, who else is accompanying Sheila and Greta?" "John, there are more than 1,000 passengers on the ship." "You understand what I'm asking, Nancy. Who else from International Casualty is on this ship?" "I can't disclose that, Nancy." "In which rooms are Sheila and Greta staying?" "They have reservations for room 113 on the sunset deck." "That's not what I asked, is it? Damn it, John. What are you trying to achieve? What do you want from me?" "In which rooms are Calvin Bostic and Clayton Mankiw staying?" Nancy hesitated for a moment, her concerned expression matching her slight stammer. Just as I slammed my fist on the desk, Nancy and the other 2 travel agents sitting up front jumped back in surprise. The 2 clients silently got up and walked away. "Damn it, Nancy, what room are those 2 in? Answer me now and stop playing games. I swear I'll tear this place apart if I have to." "Bostic and Mankiw are in room 115 on the sunset deck." She uttered the answer, barely audible. Barry leaned across the table, locking eyes with Nancy. "Nancy, Calvin is sharing a room with my wife, Greta." She trembled and attempted to push her chair away from the table. "Responding to your query, Greta and Calvin are currently sharing a room," and Calvin's frustration was evident as he forcefully struck the tabletop. "It is confirmed that both Greta and Calvin are in room 113, while Sheila and Clayton occupy room 115. However, I must emphasize that I am not the one responsible for this arrangement. It was ordered by someone else. I simply followed their instructions." Nancy, realizing she had divulged too much information, abruptly halted her sentence. She then proceeded to retrieve the requested documents and handed them over to us. It was difficult to determine if she had shed tears, but as we prepared to leave, I turned to her and emphasized the importance of not contacting anyone, whether on the ship or elsewhere, regarding our presence or our conversation. I warned her that such actions would result in dire consequences for her business. Exiting the building, Barry expressed his uncertainty about how we would proceed. I admitted that I had no concrete plan. It had simply seemed like a good idea at the time. Barry made the decision to leave his 2 daughters, Grace and Marie, in the care of his sister, Beth, who also had 2 teenage girls. Once everything was settled, he intended to join us at the house. We dedicated the evening to reviewing brochures and schedules, which facilitated the development of our plan. We both acknowledged that our marriages were irreparable, and our primary concern became the well-being of our children. We loved them dearly and contemplated how the divorce would impact their lives, particularly in terms of our respective responsibilities. We mutually agreed that there would be no official divorce proceedings. Instead, we would individually determine how to care for our children. I hoped that once the dust settled, I could arrange to live with Sheila and the kids. Naturally, I would ensure their basic needs were met, but I had no intention of financially supporting Sheila. All of this required careful planning and effort. If everything goes according to plan, I intend to cover their college tuition as well. This evening, we had to make a decision on how to handle the immediate issues. Fortunately, there was complimentary Wi-Fi available on the cruise ship. Barry planned to bring his laptop and download all the contact information of our friends, relatives, and coworkers, including addresses, phone numbers, and email addresses. Dealing with cell phones would still be a challenge, but we didn't want to bother with that at the moment. The cruise ship was scheduled to arrive in Montego Bay on Wednesday morning. We managed to find an affordable sightseeing flight that would bring us there by 7 a.m. on that day. Booking a room for the duration of the cruise turned out to be much simpler than we had anticipated. It took less than an hour to arrange a flight to Jamaica and reserve a room for the return journey. Sheila called and left a message informing us that they had settled into their cabin without any issues and were already at sea. She asked me to inform Barry that Greta was also on board. The evening was just beginning, and we were almost ready to depart. We planned to spend most of the following day organizing our financial and personal matters, such as bank accounts, bills, credit cards, and personal belongings. I intended to take all my belongings to my parents' house for safekeeping, while Barry's brother would take care of his things. Fortunately, a kind colleague from work allowed us to park our cars at his place and gave us a ride to the airport. Although leaving at midnight was not ideal, it was necessary. The airport was only a short taxi ride away from the cruise ship parking lot. We watched as the sun set behind the market stall. All we had with us were 2 carry-on bags and Barry's laptop. We didn't plan on dressing up, so we only brought the bare minimum of clothing. Just 10 minutes later, people began disembarking from the ship. Some headed straight to the town center, while most made their way to the waiting tour buses in an orderly fashion. Everything seemed well coordinated, as if it had been done countless times before. Sheila and Greta walked along the walkway with wide smiles on their faces. The 2 gentlemen standing behind them appeared equally delighted as they intertwined their hands. It was evident that Clayton and Calvin were the individuals in question. They were attractive men, perhaps a few years younger than Barry and myself, but certainly not displaying stereotypically masculine hands. We observed them from our small stools until they all boarded the bus destined for Dunn's River Falls. Barry greeted the ticket collector with a wave, exchanged a few words with the driver, and then approached us. Jamaicans are known for their bargaining skills. It took us approximately 5 minutes to persuade him to assist us, along with a payment of $1,200. Identifying Sheila and Greta to our newfound acquaintance posed no difficulty, and he gladly agreed to capture as many photographs as possible of the 2 couples at the falls. When we expressed our desire for slightly more daring pictures, he grinned and gave us a thumbs up. The bus was scheduled to return at 3 o'clock, and we assured him that we would wait with the agreed payment. He smiled once more and carefully emphasized the quality of his camera. Then he winked. We realized that he required an additional $200 more than the value of a $40 camera. Once the buses departed, we boarded to settle into our room for an additional $100. The obliging clerk registered us under the names Bob Jones and James Moore. If everything went smoothly, we would remain incognito for the remainder of the cruise. We quickly grabbed a bite to eat, consisting of sandwiches, and then spent the rest of the day acquainting ourselves with the layout of the ships. Within a couple of hours, we had familiarized ourselves with all the stairs, elevators, and passageways. We intended to avoid the dining room and showroom to prevent any accidental encounters with our wives. Barry set up his laptop and conducted some tests. Fortunately, we encountered no issues with internet access or email. We discussed the possibility of breaking into our wives' rooms, but ultimately decided against it. As we comfortably sat in the same booth as before, the buses began to return, and the bus to Dunn's River Falls arrived promptly as scheduled. Barry and I were enjoying a couple of glasses of Red Label when Sheila, Greta, and their companions walked past us. The straw hats we wore likely aided in concealing our identities to some extent. Our ticket collector approached us, grinning from ear to ear. There was a wealth of joy in that smile. He couldn't wait to showcase his work and wouldn't cease talking about how excellently he had done everything. However, Barry interrupted his enthusiasm by handing him a cold beer. It only took a few moments to glance at the photographs. There was much more affectionate embracing and kissing captured in them than we could have anticipated. I handed him $1,200 and another beer for the driver. We waited a few more minutes to ensure the wives had safely left the boarding area. Then we made our way back to the cabin. We had a busy evening planned, but first we needed to figure out how to discreetly have dinner. The cabin boasted a balcony that overlooked the entrance to the main dining room. Barry and I settled into comfortable seats where we could observe the passengers queuing up for their meals. We speculated that the wives would prefer an early dinner, allowing them more time for evening activities like dancing and entertainment. It didn't take long before the four of them arrived and joined the line. The couple strolled hand in hand, and no one would have suspected they weren't married. Barry gave me a puzzled look as I stood up and walked over to the service phone. Within 30 seconds, I returned with a wide grin on my face. The couples were just about to be seated when the announcement rang out. "Attention, Barry Barthel. Please join your party on the Lido deck, Barry Barthel." It wasn't an excessively loud or bothersome announcement, but it was loud enough for everyone to hear. Greta immediately turned her head as if there was an invisible loudspeaker in front of her. She stepped aside to allow the next group of seated individuals to pass by. Greta and Sheila were engaged in an animated conversation, while Clayton and Calvin patiently stood to the side. Suddenly, Greta retrieved her cell phone and dialed a number from her speed dial. After 30 seconds, she shook her head, indicating that there was no answer. Sheila followed suit and made the call. After Sheila's call went unanswered, both attendants grew concerned and proceeded to enter the dining room. "John, that was truly impressive. I would give anything to have overheard the conversation during that meal, despite how childish it may have sounded." We exchanged greetings and then headed to the sunset deck to enjoy tacos and margaritas. An hour later, we returned to our room, ready to begin our work. Today was a crucial day, as we were scheduled to arrive in Cancun the following morning. Neither of our homes received any response when we tried calling, and no one was aware that we were out of town, even if they had attempted to contact us. Whether it was my parents or Barry's brother, there was no way for them to know our whereabouts. We transferred all the pictures from Dunn's River Falls onto the laptop. Some of the photos captured all four of us, while most depicted couples. A few of them showed intimate moments, with Sheila sporting a new orange bikini that seemed to have caused a few wardrobe malfunctions on our way to the falls. Each time, she would giggle. Although a video would have been ideal, we had to make do with what we had. Barry created a collage page featuring the best dozen shots. Naturally, Clayton and Calvin appeared in all of them. Each of us selected our favorite photo, which Barry then included in an e-card. The message read, "Having a great time. Wish you were here." By 9 o'clock, we had sent out over 200 emails. I was astonished by the number of friends, family, and social contacts we had collectively. Naturally, everyone at International Casualty received a set of photos. The sky deck was incredibly windy and nearly deserted. Barry and I managed to find a quiet, secluded corner where we enjoyed 3 long-necked beers, reveling in the success of our first day. We had no clue what we would do the next day, but since the page trick had worked so well, we decided to give it another shot. We retired to bed early. The ship offered an abundance of fruit, danishes, and coffee for breakfast. We purposely avoided the main dining areas and the most crowded common spaces. Instead, we utilized the service stairways rather than the elevators. Barry and I were enjoying a refreshing rum drink with pineapple on the sun deck at the back. From there, we had a clear view of the main pool, which was gradually becoming more crowded. As we sipped on our second drink, Sheila and Greta joined us, settling comfortably into a couple of lounge chairs. However, Clayton and Calvin were nowhere to be found. Uncertain of what to do, we simply observed. At the other end of the deck, there was a bored-looking teenager engrossed in his cell phone. I always found it fascinating how quickly teenagers could send text messages on those devices. I nudged Barry, and together we approached the young guy. We were faced with the challenge of approaching a boy on a cruise ship without appearing strange. It was an awkward situation, but we managed to navigate through it. Eventually, he agreed to let us use his cell phone for a fee of $20. Hello. Hi, Sheila. It's John. I apologize for not being able to answer your call last night. I tried calling home 3 times, John. Your phone indicates you're calling from Baltimore. I'm sorry, but I had to borrow this phone. You know I can't make calls from mine. Is everything all right, John? Your parents had no idea where you were. I'm fine, just busy. Are you having a good time? Yeah, we're having a fantastic time. It's a shame you couldn't join us. All right, please say hi to Greta for me. Before I let you go, I need to return the phone to its owner. By the way, I wanted to mention that you look stunning in that orange bikini. I don't recall seeing it before. By what? John and I burst into laughter as I ended the call and handed the phone back to its owner. Barry and I decided to block Sheila and Greta's numbers on their phones. I gave the teenager another $20 and reminded him to keep our encounter a secret. He thought it was cool and readily agreed. Sheila and Greta were searching all over the ship in an attempt to find me. Sheila tried to conceal herself with a large towel, as if trying to avoid being noticed. It was a foolish move on her part. She attempted to call the number we had used twice, but eventually gave up. Clayton and Calvin arrived a few moments later. Barry proceeded directly to the service phone on the sun deck. Shortly after, he returned to the railing with a broad smile on his face. Attention, Barry Bartell. Kindly join your group at the shuffleboard court. Barry Bartell, kindly join your group at the shuffleboard court. Upon hearing this announcement, there was a flurry of activity near the pool. Greta and Sheila swiftly gathered their belongings and made their way to the shuffleboard court on the port side of the yacht. Meanwhile, Clayton and Calvin simply stood there, appearing displeased. We observed our wives intently from above. They waited for half an hour before departing. As they strolled back to their room, Sheila took out her cell phone and made a call. Judging by the expression on her face, we realized that the postcards had arrived home. We were unsure of the person she was speaking to, but it was inconsequential. Everyone who knew us as a couple possessed pictures of Sheila and Greta with their boyfriends. They lingered in the middle of the deck for a few minutes, examining the displays on Sheila's cell phone before heading towards the cabin deck. Clayton and Calvin attended the evening dinner without their female companions. They spent the remainder of the evening indulging in drinks at the cabaret bar on the lagoon deck. Barry and I occupied a secluded corner throughout the evening, enjoying beer and pizza. They never noticed us. We contemplated whether we should move closer to eavesdrop on their conversation, but ultimately decided against it. Our wives never made an appearance. Around midnight, both of them left the bar in an inebriated state. Several crew members had to assist them back to their cabins. We never discovered how they slept, but it held no significance to us. We were on the sun deck, relishing a breakfast of fresh fruit and coffee, when the Diamond Sunset docked in Cancun. Most of the passengers gathered on the promenade deck, eagerly awaiting the day's festivities. We had yet to determine our plans for the day. It seemed rather foolish to us to attempt to follow two couples while they were ashore. However, it was inconsequential as Sheila and Greta were among the first to disembark from the ship with their luggage. They weren't embarking on a day trip, but rather leaving the cruise altogether. While the other tourists were boarding the tour buses, Sheila and Greta hailed a cab and quickly departed. Barry and I exchanged a final greeting, unprepared for this unexpected turn of events. We anticipated our wives would locate us soon, considering the boat's limited size, yet they made no attempt to do so. Clayton and Calvin also exited the ship and boarded a tour bus, leaving us uncertain of their feelings. We savored a leisurely lunch in the sparsely populated dining room. With one more stop before returning to Grand Cayman, we needed to strategize. Perhaps a relaxed lunch in the dining room awaited us later. Despite most passengers being ashore, Sheila and Greta's absence made no difference. The atmosphere became more laid back and enjoyable. The ship was set to depart Cancun that evening and reach the Cayman Islands the following afternoon. It seemed like the perfect opportunity for a heart-to-heart conversation. Discussing matters with Clayton and Calvin was necessary, but Barry and I were unsure of what to say. As we entered the formal dining room, we noticed our wives and their partners had secured a table for four, with 2 empty seats. Barry and I waited until Clayton and Calvin were seated before approaching their table and taking a seat. No one objected or questioned our presence. Introductions were in order. "Good evening, gentlemen. I assume you recognize us," I began. Calvin offered a slight nod while Clayton's expression revealed his displeasure at our arrival. Their reactions varied, with Calvin appearing apprehensive and uncertain, and Clayton clearly irritated. "Gentlemen, Mr. Barthel and I will not be joining you for dinner. With only 3 days left on the cruise, we felt it necessary to caution you to exercise caution." I noticed Barry chuckling, but I chose not to acknowledge him. Calvin appeared intrigued, while Clayton seemed increasingly agitated. It is worth noting that 222 individuals go overboard on pleasure cruises annually and are never found. After a brief pause for emphasis, Barry and I rose from our seats and exited the dining area. Although we could hear Calvin talking, we couldn't discern his words. We both opted for tacos and beer for our evening meal. Due to the strong wind, we decided against going out on the deck, but the sunset was stunning through the windows of the living room. "Well, John, that was quite the spectacle. I'm not entirely sure what you were expecting, but you certainly captured their attention. I'm not sure I did either. Let's reconvene tomorrow and reassess the situation." Unfortunately, things didn't go as planned. "Gentlemen, I am Mr. Sorensen. If I may have a moment of your time, please." Barry and I swiveled our chairs to face the imposing Nordic crewman who had approached us. 2 other crew members stood silently nearby. I glanced at Barry. We exchanged smiles before nodding in acknowledgement of this figure of authority. "Am I addressing Mr. Jones and Mr. Moore, or Mr. Barthel and Mr. Connor?" Barthel and Connor. There was no point in concealing our identities. Some of our fellow passengers claimed that you threatened to throw them overboard. Can you provide an explanation for their allegations? No, we did not threaten them. We simply cited statistics on maritime accidents. In fact, we advised them to exercise caution. It was a subtle warning, and you both know it. Why would we do such a thing? The burly Swede, or whatever his name was, gestured towards a quiet corner of the room, and we all followed suit. "Gentlemen, did you threaten Mr. Bostic and Mr. Mankey?" Barry and I exchanged glances and seemed to reach a consensus on our response. Yes, despite not being phrased as a threat, our words were indeed spoken with that intention. Was there a specific reason behind that perceived threat? Absolutely, and you were certainly a contributing factor to that reason. The expression on his face clearly indicated his anticipation for a more detailed explanation. "Mr. Sorensen, Nordic Cruise Lines arranged for these two gentlemen to share cabins with our wives. Throughout the week, Mr. Bostic was with Mrs. Barthel, while Mr. Mankey shared a stateroom with my wife. It appears that Nordic Cruise Lines is hosting a cruise with entertainment at sea, targeting married women seeking to spend time with their lovers. While I understand that you are likely legally protected from such occurrences, the situation appears quite distressing to me. Mr. Connor, I empathize with your frustration regarding your wife's actions, but surely you do not believe that the cruise line endorses or supports such behavior. We pride ourselves on being a family-oriented company and are committed to maintaining that reputation. Barry and I remained silent in response to his inquiries. Although we did have thoughts to share, we opted to remain quiet at that moment. Both of us reclined in our chairs and exchanged smiles. Despite Sorensen appearing slightly flustered, he maintained control of the conversation. Regrettably, we will need to report this matter to the appropriate authorities. They may have inquiries for you. Which authorities, you may ask? We are currently at sea. Aren't you the authorities in this situation, you may ask? We are currently at sea. Aren't you the authorities in this situation, Mr. Connor? Mr. Barthel, I kindly request that you refrain from interacting with Mr. Mankey and Mr. Bostic for the remainder of the cruise. Can you assure me that you will not cause any disturbances before we reach Miami? Barry and I nodded in agreement with smiles on our faces. The group departed, leaving us alone in the room. We spent the evening composing emails to various media outlets in the region, embellishing details, and even including photos that we knew could not be published. The following morning, we enjoyed a hearty breakfast in the dining area. Clayton and Calvin were absent during the meal. Later, as the ship arrived at the Grand Cayman Islands, we passed by their cabins and noticed the breakfast dishes left outside their doors. We observed Calvin disembarking with his luggage, bidding farewell to the ship. He left his maid behind. Barry and I decided to spend the day on land, although there wasn't much of interest. However, we did have an enjoyable time swimming with the manta rays. It was a fun experience, although my mind kept wandering to thoughts of the crocodile hunter. Surprisingly, it was the only activity during the entire trip that wasn't driven by revenge. In the evening, we once again relished a satisfying dinner. Clayton was nowhere to be found. It crossed my mind that he may have left the ship after us, but I highly doubted it. Barry had received more than 30 email responses to the postcard we had sent out. Most of them were lighthearted, filled with laughter, but a few were serious and criticized our actions as despicable. We were pleased to discover that our intended audience had received our message. Friends and acquaintances found it amusing. However, our family members responded with disapproval. Sheila and Greta had not sent any messages. Tomorrow we would be returning home, so we made sure to fully charge both of our phones before going to bed. We even sent out 32 press releases, despite our lack of knowledge on how to properly prepare and distribute them. Among those press releases, we made sure to send 2 to Piccolo World Tours, the company that owns the Good Time travel agency franchise. We may have gone a bit overboard in accusing Nancy Rayburn of organizing trips for married housewives to have romantic rendezvous with their boyfriends. We exaggerated the situation to make our point, but we believed she deserved it. The rest of the story ended up in newspapers and was featured on Exposa TV shows. Hopefully, we will receive some sort of response. It had been a good day, and we had a restful night's sleep. The following morning, we enjoyed breakfast on the Lido deck. Once we finished, Barry switched on his cell phone. I received a single call from my father. We had separated and each made our initial calls since the journey began. Dad, it's John. I noticed you've been trying to reach me. What's happening? Well, son, I assume you have more information about this situation than I do. All I know is that Sheila arrived on Wednesday and took the children with her. You had asked me not to allow her to take them, but I couldn't prevent it. Later, I entered the house, but she was nowhere to be found. The front door was unlocked, so I went inside and searched. Most of her clothes and the children's clothes were gone. It appeared as though she was in a rush to leave. She didn't mention where she was headed. Jason seemed a bit upset about leaving, and I overheard her mention something about Noble's Grove. It seemed to lift his spirits. Sheila's sister, Loretta, resides in Mount Carmel. That's likely where she went. I'll try to find her phone number and give her a call. John, we received the postcard with the photos. Can you explain what's happening? I believe it's quite evident, Dad. Sheila decided to go on a cruise with a former colleague. She left me behind to care for the children while she enjoyed the company of another man. What would you like me to do, Dad? Did you lock the house? Yes, that's all I could think of. Barry and I hadn't planned on returning home immediately, but circumstances have changed. I've decided that Sheila will remain in the house with the children. I have no clue why she left. What are your plans? I'm uncertain, but I think I'll be seeing you in a day or so. I'll keep you updated in the meantime. Thank you for calling. I made my way to pour myself a cup of coffee as Barry continued speaking. He appeared displeased. We both assumed that our wives would be returning home to the children, and we intended to reside elsewhere for a few months while we figured out our next steps. Our plan is to seek employment in the Pensacola region. Barry returned with a despondent look on his face. He took hold of a Danish pastry from the buffet table and settled into the chaise lounge opposite me. Wow, you seem just as thrilled as I am. My travel companion forced a weak smile and hummed. John, she's gone. Greta has left the children with my sister. What? She left the kids. What did she say? According to Beth, she hardly said anything. She thanked Beth for looking after them, and then spoke to the girls for a few minutes. Beth mentioned that her car was filled with clothes. I don't know how she found out. I left the kids there. She was alone when she left. What about the house? Beth's husband said no one was in the house. All the furniture and belongings were still there, but Greta didn't live there. He didn't go inside, but I assume all her clothes are gone. Things didn't go as planned for me either. Sheila found out that the boys were at my parents' house and took them from there. I think she went to her sister's in Mount Carmel, but I'm not certain. She took all her clothes and the boys' clothes with her. It seems like my house is empty too. We sat in silence for a few moments. Barry looked at me with concern. I know, it's early in the morning, but I could use a beer. We spent the remainder of our cruise in the Lido Lounge, drinking more beer than we were accustomed to. As the ship departed, we walked up to the railing and watched the weary passengers heading home. We didn't see the Clayton sail, but the place was quite crowded. The friendly bartender informed us that the lounge was now closed, so we made our way back to our stateroom, where we discovered all our belongings packed and lying in the aisle. We were informed that we would be met by authorities to answer for our threatening behavior. We didn't really understand which authorities they were referring to, but it didn't matter. No one escorted us off the ship, and no one was expecting to meet us. It was, to say the least, a letdown. Not that I was disappointed, but we were hoping for a bit of media attention, but none of that materialized. Barry and I took the last 2 seats in the airport limo van. The cost of one-way tickets back home without prior notice was incredibly high, but we felt like we had no other option. During the return flight, we barely exchanged any words. Our plans had gone awry, leaving both of us feeling a bit down. Barry still had his children, but his wife was no longer with him. On the other hand, I had neither children nor a wife. Coming back to an empty house was far from a pleasant experience. There were no signs or messages from Sheila anywhere in the house or on our phones. I decided to call her workplace and discovered that she no longer worked at International Casualty. Although I couldn't be certain, I assumed that Greta, Clayton, and Calvin were no longer employed there either. The rest of the first day was spent cleaning up the house and getting rid of Sheila's belongings that she either misplaced or no longer needed. Barry faced a similar situation. All he had left were the memories of Greta's brief visit to bid farewell to her daughters. According to Beth, Greta cried when she left the house. Both of us canceled our credit cards and restricted access to our finances. Greta was now a grown woman and capable of taking care of herself. However, Sheila had Todd and Jason, and I needed to figure out how to provide for them. It saddened me that she had taken them away, but I had to acknowledge that she was their mother and had a responsibility to protect and care for them. It seemed that Greta wasn't confident enough to take that risk. In a way, it was a beneficial arrangement, especially for the children. Barry and his daughters had settled into their new home, and things were gradually returning to normal, as one would expect. Beth took care of the girls while Barry was at work and assisted him with household tasks as much as she could. My life, on the other hand, had completely changed. All that awaited me were evenings spent watching TV and eating microwave dinners. I conducted some inquiries and discovered that Calvin Bostic had left town immediately after being fired. Clayton had also lost his job, but no one knew where he currently worked or resided. I reached out to Sheila's sister, Loretta, in an attempt to find out what had happened to the kids, but my efforts were in vain. Loretta claimed that Sheila had stayed for one night and then left without informing anyone of her whereabouts. I didn't truly believe her, but I had no choice but to trust her until proven otherwise. Surprisingly, Barry and I had grown apart. He had a family, or at least a part of one, while I had nothing. I attempted to spend time with him and the girls, but it was always awkward. At the start of the new school year, I visited the administrative office at the boys' previous school. I informed them that I wanted to ensure Todd and Jason's school records were transferred correctly. A very kind young lady assured me that the paperwork had been sent to North Shock Hill Elementary School in Frackville 2 weeks prior. She seemed proud to provide me with that information, and I expressed my gratitude. It didn't take me long to discover Sheila's new cell phone number. I had to dial the number 3 times before she finally picked up. Caller ID is a useful feature, unless someone is using it to avoid speaking with you. I didn't prolong the conversation. I asked her to meet me at the food court in Frackville Mall. I waited for over 30 minutes for her to arrive. This was our first contact since her romantic cruise, and I was determined not to mention it at all. I had a large coffee in front of me, but it had turned cold by the time she sat down at the table. We didn't exchange any words or greetings. Eventually, I had to break the silence. "I want you and the boys to return to the house." Sheila shifted uncomfortably on the hard plastic seat in the mall. She hadn't grabbed a drink before joining me, so her hands were empty. "All 4 of you together?" "No, just you and the boys. I have a small apartment nearby. The house will be more familiar and comfortable for Todd and Jason. They can go back to their old school, and I can see them regularly. I can't afford to live in a house. I will take care of the rent and utilities. I will provide you with money for food and other household expenses. I will also handle the boys' clothing and school expenses. What about me?" "Well, Sheila, you're an adult now. I believe you are capable of managing on your own. I must focus on my work. You can arrange your schedule to work while the boys are at school or in the evenings, so I can supervise them. I am confident you will find something to occupy your time." It was a mix of emotions for her. I am uncertain about her expectations or what she was willing to accept. Her eyes scanned the mall as if she was pondering or searching for something. I believe she saw both positives and negatives in this proposition. "Very well, I will do it for the boys." "You are correct. It will be beneficial for them. When would you like to proceed?" "I will vacate the premises in the next few days, and you can move in whenever you wish." The decision had been made. The entire conversation took less time than my wait in that uncomfortable chair. For a brief moment, we both sat in silence. "John, is there anything else you wish to discuss?" That was my signal to depart. I promptly rose and placed the empty paper cup on the table. "No. I am uncertain, but I believe I noticed a slight tear in her eyes before I walked away and left the mall." Upon glancing back, she was still seated there. The following 6 months passed without any major incidents. Sheila secured a job that allowed her to work while the boys were at school. I would leave them at my apartment on weekends, and she would care for them during the week. Barry received a divorce petition from Greta, or whatever it is called. It was sent from Nevada. His daughters resided with him, and it appeared that they were managing well. I believe his sister and mother were assisting him. Work was progressing better than anticipated. Regrettably, to advance within the company, I would need to relocate. Given the circumstances, I was hesitant to make the move. Christmas was approaching, and then everything fell apart. Upon returning from lunch, I found Todd and Jason waiting for me in the office. "What is happening? Why are you not at school?" "The furnace malfunctioned. We were all dismissed." Jason simply gazed at his feet while Todd began to explain. "When did you all arrive here?" "We'd returned home first, and then decided to come here. The key was hidden under the mat." "You could have come in earlier." They were both staring at the floor. "What's happening? What are you concealing?" Jason chose to join the conversation. He spoke rapidly and appeared to be stuttering slightly. "When we arrived home, my mother left her bedroom door ajar. She was inside with that man, Clayton." "He was in the bedroom?" "Yes, Dad. They were engaging in intimate activities. They were both unclothed and engaging in such activities like what you see on the internet." I remained silent. What could I possibly say? How could I erase that disturbing image from their minds? Jason extended his cell phone to me. I saw the photos. It only took a few seconds to confirm that everything they had told me was true. Todd seemed inclined to mention that Clayton had visited the house multiple times and that Sheila had instructed them not to disclose his presence. She warned them that if I became upset, they would all have to relocate back to Frackville. We conversed for a few more minutes and concluded that the boys should move in with me. I handed them the keys to the apartment and bid them farewell. Subsequently, I proceeded to the Human Resources office. Minot, North Dakota may not have resembled a vacation destination, but there was an immediate job opening, and I was free. After addressing financial matters for a few hours, I made my way back to the house. Sheila must have been at work because the house was deserted. The bed was unmade, leading me to believe she had returned home for an afternoon nap. I hadn't even realized Clayton was still present. Just as I finished loading the boys' belongings into the car, she entered through the front door. "John, what's happening? I thought we had an agreement. Where are you taking all this stuff?" "The agreement is null and void, Sheila. The boys and I are leaving. You can shout all you want, but it won't change anything. You can't keep my boys, John. I won't allow it, and the courts won't allow it either. I'm taking them. If you wish to regain custody, you can go to court and explain everything to them." "What is the significance of that?" She stood confidently, with her hands on her hips and a smirk on her face. I placed the final bag on the floor and turned to face my beloved wife. "What did you have for lunch today, my dear? What relevance does that have? Why do you even care? My lunch is none of your concern." She exuded an abundance of self-assurance. "By the way, the heating system malfunctioned at school today." "I'm sorry, I don't understand." "The school furnace stopped working this morning. All the students were sent home during lunchtime. I'll ask you again, darling. What did you have for lunch today?" Her bravado vanished, and she sank onto the living room couch. She remained silent, just sitting there. I picked up the final bag, but paused at the door before leaving. Jason took some pictures. I hope Clayton has health insurance because he'll need it. I let him off the hook last time, but now they'll have to face the consequences. She didn't cry or faint. She simply sat there like a zombie. I made an effort not to slam the door, as I didn't want to spoil the atmosphere. We purchased a small trailer and had everything packed by the end of the week. I drove past Clayton Mankey's house, but the owner claimed he had left that day and didn't provide an address. I decided to deal with Clayton later. I found out that Sheila had consulted a lawyer regarding custody of the boys, but she never attempted to contact me about it. We quickly settled into our new home, and the boys were content with everything. Strangely, they never seemed to miss their mother. About 6 months later, I received divorce papers from Carson City, Nevada. She didn't ask for anything, and I didn't offer anything either. It always bothered me that she didn't fight for custody of her sons. I often think about it, but I never bring it up. I believe it's crucial for the boys to have a mother. Next week, I will begin searching for a mother. Todd and Jason have agreed to assist.